Janiessa Norice, and this is Define Design. As a content designer, collaboration is an opportunity to identify new insights, understand product needs, and view emerging trends. In order for UX writers to wordsmith the content shown on the screen, we must open an investigation of sorts. You see, communicating with the user is a key part of the job, but unlike face to face communication, we're unable to rely on body language or social cues in order to keep the conversation afloat. Aside from user feedback, another way to discover user thoughts and pain points would be through testing. I've joined a few testing sessions, some with UX researchers and some without. And I'd have to say, the sessions that included researchers had a lot more insight than those that didn't. Unfortunately, having a UX researcher in your product space is not always the case, but the curiosity about the changes in your product's usability will still exist. So this led me to wonder, what strategies could product teams without researchers adopt to enhance their research methods? To gain insight on this, I've reached out to the founder of CX UX Spark, Dominique Simmons. Dominique has over 10 years of experience with teams both large and small in consulting vital business growth in areas of program management, data science, and of course, user research. Listen in as we chat about how she helps teams achieve business outcomes by increasing customer adoption and engagement. We'll also touch on the significance of user research, explore different methods, and discuss practical applications. Let's tune in. Hey everybody, we have Dominique here with us today on Fine Design. Thanks so much for joining us. Dominique is well skilled in user research and she has a lot of insight that she'd like to share with us. And so I just want to start with giving Dominique the opportunity to introduce herself.
Thank you so much. I'm the founder of CX UX Spark. As a consultant, I help early stage companies achieve their business outcomes through customer driven development. And I have insights over 7 years, both as a UX researcher and customer experience program manager in enterprise data and AI across startups, tech consulting, and finally big tech. Customer-driven, development and user-centered development has been at the forefront of my work to ensure that data and AI solutions are usable. And in terms of how I define UX researchers, first I want to, honor all types of researchers: market research, R&D, academic. But for these purposes, we'll focus on UX. So to me, a UX researcher leverages methodology and process to investigate user needs and motivations, draws patterns from those, delivers the key insights and recommendations to their stakeholders, framed within a business context.
All right. So taking these different methods and researching them and putting them into a business context. So to me, the translation as from being a content designer, we have those same goals, but in a sense of how we're communicating with the user. So when it comes to building the product, designing or redesigning, improving whatever it is that we're doing on our 9 to 5 time frame, when I encounter certain areas, for example, we can use a scenario. If users aren't trying the new features, I may be one of the first to notice it, seeing that I'm the person who communicates and I'm saying, hey, there's a drop here, there. After they cross this space, what is going on? From there, if I were to reach out to you, the researcher, which sometimes we do have that affordance where there's a researcher available for this product space, or there's a researcher that's willing to give us insight on how to navigate through our research. And sometimes we don't. So I really want to highlight what would be a general sense of how to go about discovering pain points within your product experience. So if I were to call you such as now and say, hey, we noticed that we have a drop in usage and we have these value props and we're just not seeing users truly interact. Could you assist us in discovering what this problem could be? What would be your first question to me, or what would be your needs?
Sure. So the first thing I would ask you is, or try to get a sense of is what do we already know? And that could be, looking through previous user feedback, the telemetry in the product, where users are dropping off, what are they, where are you finding less activity or more activity to really try to understand, do we have an early picture at what the core issues are? And then from a practical standpoint, I'd also want to understand what's the timeline. What are, not only what are we hoping to learn here, but how much time do we have to learn? Because that can drastically alter what kind of methodology we're going to be using.
Okay. And when you consider the different types of methodology, what are some that come to mind? Are there any favorites that you may have, or are there some that you have yet to try?
Yeah, there are plenty that are left to try.
Okay.
I would say my favorite is customer interviews. I love talking and user interviews. I love talking with folks one on one, just to really understand and get uh, their singular perspective, and have a chance to really dive in. Uh, when we don't have that, that affordance of time, um, and we have the scale, doing a survey is also can also be effective, especially if you can run it across a large number of users. Another one of my favorites, going back to the qualitative side, is focus groups. So being able to get a small subset of users within the same group, and if it's led effectively, you can hear a diverse, perspectives, and they can also sort of there's some camaraderie, if you will, around the challenges that they're facing and how they're solving that today.
So I'm curious, when coming to gather data from participants specifically, and you can have like focus groups, as you mentioned, or live, like coffee table testing or anything of that nature, how do you cast the net to get these participants to actually see and test out these product spaces?
So, a great question. This can really widely vary depending on your scope and your budget. I tend to, and this might get into another topic, but I tend to run, groups of 4 or 5, just to get a sense of, are we starting to see patterns? And if not, start to run the next 5 or so. But in terms of finding folks, this can be really tricky, especially if you're a startup or a smaller company. I've used very scrappy methods where honestly, I've talked to uh, early trial users, even friends and family who are willing to test the product. Sometimes you have to get a little bit, scrappy, if you will. But if you're in an organization that's larger, has more resources and funding, I've used platforms like Respondent, user testing, user interviews, and you can find pretty qualified uh, participants as long as you create an effective screener. And yeah, that's a great place to find folks.
And so I've set in on moderated testing before for a product space, which was quite insightful. Unfortunately, for my product team at the time, we did not have a researcher on staff. So we were kind of winging it and relying on that little bit of boot camp experience where we covered the research mostly. But I want to ask you about the difference that you've noticed in your own experience between moderated and unmoderated testing sessions. Do you feel as though you get more insight from one versus the other, or that you're able to read the user a little bit better?
Yes. So I like to think of, I like to use them depending on what stage we're at. If we're in an early discovery phase where we don't really know much about the user motivations, or have maybe a little bit of inkling of uh, what challenges they're facing, but we're not quite sure, I think uh, a moderated method you know, a live user interview will be more effective because there's follow-up. There's opportunity for follow-up. So I'll put this more in a design perspective. So let's say there's a prototype and it's the first one, really unsure about the value that it has for users. We're still trying to understand how they're going to navigate this. So we in a moderated session, we have the user walk through the experience and, you know, share their reactions aloud, their expectations, all of that. And like I said, this gives you a chance, you're watching the user navigate the screens, navigate the experience, but also you're able to pause and say, oh, I noticed you hesitate before you were going to click that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or, if they have questions, you can answer them on the fly or ask, is this what you were expecting? So there's a lot of opportunity there to follow up. I would say if you've done a couple of prototypes, maybe this is the third one, you're farther along in the direction, then maybe spinning up an unmoderated test makes sense. So on usertesting.com, for example, what you would do is you would share a link to the prototype, password protected, however you need to do it. And it has recording. So the user will record their voice as they're going through the experience. So you'll get that, audio file recording and video recording. And you can also prompt them with questions on the screen as they're navigating through it. So you'll get those responses as well. So it's offline, you'll be able to review those really quickly, especially, if you just have like quick metrics that you're trying to capture from that experience. So I would say that would be the way to go for unmoderated.
Okay. So when preparing for doing either moderated or unmoderated, any testing situation, let's discuss how you discover what to ask or what to look out for. Like, I understand the pain point will be introduced from someone from the product team. This is the issue that we're having. This is all that we know about said issue. However, what are some questions that can come from, I guess, do you collaborate with other product members? I'm assuming PM or whomever reaches out and says, hey, we have this issue, to come up with the questions that need to be asked to the respondent in order to discover what is the problem. For example, when you mentioned there may be hesitation. Why is there hesitation? Is the user still reading? Did they not understand what they read? Are they confused by the design? Do they not know where to click? Those sorts of questions. Do you work with product members to discover what those questions are, or do you take just general questions and then see what you receive from there and report back before getting insight from the team?
Okay. So typically, I like to ground questions in a couple of ways. One, in the you have you come in with your central research question of, for example, like you've this scenario that you've described, why aren't users using this feature, right? Or why are we seeing churn? Something of the like. So we have this central question. And then from there, we can come up with hypotheses. So some assumptions of why this may be true. And I think you just alluded to a few of them that could be, the case. So from those assumptions and hypotheses, we can then start to form the interview questions. Now, that's part one, and that's kind of a process. The other thing I want to highlight, and something that's helped me add structure to my process, is the hypothesis progression framework. And it was actually developed by two principal researchers at Microsoft. There's a book called The Customer Driven Playbook, and it's an amazing guide for testing products, software products, and translating customer feedback into successful products. So within that hypothesis framework, you have 5 pillars: customer, problem, concept, feature, and business. Before getting to, how does this feature work? Is it being used successfully? How is it going to impact the business? I'd like to meet teams where they are. And for example, I meet you where you are and say, all right, what do we most need to know? Do we need to know, do we need to ask questions around the customer and their motivations, the problem, and what kind of the reasons why they may not be able to address their goals. What are the problems that they're facing? And then three, if there's a concept that is inception, what does that, how valuable, to what extent is that concept valuable? So grounding in those first three areas, you start to develop questions that are more structured and more effective. Now, the last thing I'll say about that is coming up with the interview questions is a collaborative process. So, me as a researcher, I will draft out a series of questions, put them in a flow and order, and then I will run them by you, to make sure that they're they're maximizing the learnings that you're looking to do. These are covering the topics that you need to know about and so forth.
Okay. And just curious, what if a product member wants to join the research session?
Yeah. So as some may differ in this opinion, but I believe in bringing stakeholders along for the ride. So I'm happy to set the the project up in a way and the study up in a way where we can have observers. So I would invite you, Janiessa, and maybe a few other folks. Now, of course, it's important to set expectations, especially if it's a live call. So, we want to be mindful of using the chat. I usually set up a back channel. Let's say it's set up on Teams or whatever platform. I want to make sure that any internal comments are kind of channeled out so that only us internally can see it and not the user. Obviously, we don't want to overcrowd the session either. If I'm remembering correctly, it might be user interviews. I don't remember the exact platform, but there's one where it's designed to have anonymous observers join. So it's great because they can sneak in and out. They're not disrupting the session and they're able to get learnings on the fly. So it's great.
Yeah, that sounds pretty great. That's something they should adopt for like the interview process when we have our presentations.
Exactly.
That would be so awesome. Okay. But all right. So having product members in the interview, you have your questions, you're in the session and you're seeing the respondents interact with the product. Other than hesitation, what are some other things that you look for during that time?
So aside from that, I look for points of confusion. So hesitance can mean a couple of things, but they may verbally say, "Oh, what does this mean?" It's really common for teams to come up with content that isn't necessarily industry standard. It might feel more bit more proprietary, and it doesn't mean the same thing internally as it does externally to a user. So that's something to definitely watch out for. I notice, I'm trying to think what else, hesitations, strong reactions. And it could be positive too. Like, oh, wow, this is like exactly what I was looking for, or, this is really cool to see. I'm looking for those type of reactions too. Oftentimes, as a UX researcher, yes, it's important that I do due diligence and share what's not going so well. But I think it's also important to share what's going well, too.
Yeah, very true. And just out of curiosity, if you're testing 5 people, how many people before you sense something as a pattern, such as if 2 people look lost in the same spot versus if 4 people look lost in the same spot?
Yeah, so that can get kind of tricky. Also, it can get into maybe some statistics of, what's the intended sample size, and out of that, how many folks, did you observe that behavior in? So that can really widely vary by study. And the other thing you want to assess is risk too of whatever that observation is. Is it a big deal? Like what's the risk of that, I guess, keeping the functionality in that way? So, it really depends.
Okay. Okay. That's pretty insightful because I know sometimes, especially with A/B testing and trying to decide on which design to go with, it can vary on many different things. It can vary on the region, such as one country may take to one design better than the other, depending on how we're introducing things and what their priorities are. It's just really, I look at the whole idea of research is truly getting a better understanding of who this user is, what they're capable of, and what they can grow into potentially. Because as we add to our products and we have ideas of different features to add, we're going to want our users to be as excited about the products that we were when we were creating them. Otherwise, there's no point and there's no relationship. And so I kind of, in a broader scope of things, I know that as content, I communicate with the user, but as research, you guys make sure that there is alignment within the relationship between product and user by verifying our work in a different way, in a live way, where our users are actively giving us feedback and saying, it would be nice if it did this, or I don't understand why it does that, or I clicked this and then it took me somewhere else and I didn't know how to get back. But those are the things that get highlighted during the feedback sessions and during the testing sessions. So when you're sharing your findings, I'm doing all this to land the plane here. When you're sharing your findings with your team members, I want to just chat about the different meetings that you have to share your findings, because I'm pretty sure there are a few. Seeing that on a content side, if we have any updates, we share it with our content people, we share it with our product team, the feature team, the broader team. Like, so many people get an invite to the slideshow, and just curious of what that looks like for you when sharing those findings or
Yeah,
presenting.
yeah. I think you alluded to part of this is that typically during the study phase, I'm working with, let's say working with you, Janiessa, and just maybe a close few.
Mhm.
Maybe there's a PM, a product manager, potentially an engineer, but just a few of us, and a UX designer, and we're all. So once I've synthesized the data and all of that, I will do a debrief with all of you to share the raw results, some insights, and get your perspectives. And in that will help me develop the next step, which would be like a broader share out with the broader team and stakeholders, leadership too. When it gets to that point, it's really important to be concise and not bury the lead. As researchers, and I've done this before and I've worked on it over the years. And that's, sometimes starting out with the methodology first and then getting to the insights later. But especially if you have senior leaders in the room,
Mhm.
they need those points right then and there. So I think, leading with the insights and recommendations and then being able to provide methodological details, how that came about is the most effective way of sharing. The other thing I'll mention too is um, there's a lot of value in the live share out. There's also uh, there's also a lot of value in some respect, leaving a trail of your work for others to find asynchronously. And what I mean by that is, being able to contribute to a repository or central place where you can leave a brief report of all of those findings, recommendations, and so forth, in a, sort of an executive summary of what you found. And that way, let's say there's a designer that comes by who, they're thinking about maybe they need to do a study, but they read your work and they're set. They have enough evidence to go ahead and confidence to build that next prototype. Or maybe it's a PM that can take some of the learnings from your work and build up their spec. So there are a lot of uses and there's a lot of value both in a live meeting and also doing a brief report.
That was very insightful just to know. Have that documentation from the testing, and it's great for just the shifts of life and everything that happens within the cycle of a product. Because when you're brought onto a new team, you only know exactly what you see. You don't know the reasons all the time. And you may have the same thoughts that the last person had without understanding the reasoning of why.
this hasn't happened or it's unable to happen at this time. I think that's very great. One last question that I do have for you today: for people that are interested in user research as a profession, do you have any insight that you would like to provide? And I would also like to give you the opportunity to let people know how to reach out to you in the event that they would like to carry this conversation further.
That's great. Well, it is quite the market if you've been following along and if you're trying to get into it as an aspiring designer, researcher. So I guess there are a lot of resources. I would say connecting with existing researchers and aspiring researchers on LinkedIn, it can be a huge benefit. Joining conversations. I think a lot of people, they, especially when they're coming from non-traditional backgrounds, they can feel like they don't really have a voice or place in these conversations, and you totally do. In fact, having a non-traditional background can help set you apart, makes you that 1% different than, or I guess being in that 1% to stand out compared to others. Like I said, I would encourage you to, you know, join those conversations, comment on, popular posts, connect with people who you find interesting and want to learn more about. And you never know what kind of opportunities that opens up. I will say, while I work with early stage companies and product teams, I also do mentoring and coaching for folks who are aspiring UXers. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and also check out my website, cxuxspark.com.
Thank you so much, Dominique, for joining us today. And
That was Dominique Simmons. From our chat, you can see that user research is crucial to achieving business goals. I hope you enjoyed our conversation as we discussed the significance of user research, collaboration, and the different methods of gathering data. If you'd like to continue chatting with Dominique, I've placed her information in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe on the platform of your choice. This episode was written and produced by me, Janiessa Norice, while editing and post-production is done by Digital Sunflower. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, turn your problems into opportunities.